Welcome to the Easy Speak Speakeasy.
You've unlocked the door to unfiltered mental health and wellness conversations.
Your tongue's already out.
39.
Feeling fine.
Feeling fine. 39. Swinging on that summer vine. Episode 39.
Yes.
One episode away from the big 4-0, which is, I feel like, a milestone.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
This has been a journey.
Yes, it has.
Yeah. Welcome, everyone, to the Easy Speak Speakeasy. Bringing those unfiltered conversations to your eardrums.
Yeah, it's your hosts, Dahyana and KG, the OG KG.
The OG KG up in here.
Yeah. So we've got a really interesting topic today. We're talking about breaking chains.
Mm-hmm. Because we're in
It's July.
Minority Mental Health Month, or some people are now calling it BIPOC Mental Health Month.
Yeah.
Whatever flavor you like, use it.
What's your flavor? There's a song for everything.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And if there isn't, we create one.
Yeah, true. If life was a musical.
So let's kick it off with a cheers.
Yes.
What are we drinking today, ma'am?
Cheers to Black People Mental Health Month.
Yes. I love it.
Love it.
Cheers.
Today we're drinking a tequila sour margarita.
Yummy. That is so good.
Right? Check out the Easy Sips for the recipe.
Yes.
Delicious.
On any of our socials.
Yeah.
Easy Speak on air.
Yep.
Blam.
All right, go make you one and then come back. Hit the pause button, go make one and come back, because this is worth it.
This is worth it.
Worth it.
Go get some tequila.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so where do we even start with this topic? I feel like I have so many thoughts.
I know.
Like just waiting to burst out of my mouth.
There's a lot. I mean, I think, a couple of episodes ago, we talked with Anna about generational curses.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is something that is spoken about a lot in Black communities.
Yeah.
Being a curse breaker and, shifting the future for your family and all of those sorts of things. But I think when we hear that terminology, we really think about it through a mental health lens and what does generational curses really mean, right? And I think we see that word generational curses as like generational trauma.
Yes.
And so I think this is a great topic and a great place to start, because there's so much stigma around mental health and mental health treatment in Black communities. Mm-hmm. And so I think when we start to infuse this language together, that it helps to eliminate some of that stigma and help people feel like, all right, it's not bad to go to a therapist, or it doesn't make me weak, or some of the other stigmas that are existing.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of that recognizing. So when we're talking about generational curses, we're talking about the things, and we all have them, right? The things about the way that our family is, right? Like, if you ever ask the question, why are we this way? Or why are they this way? You might, really resonate with the rest of this conversation, because what we're really talking about is that, trauma, and there's a long history of trauma in the Black community and minority communities for a plethora of reasons. And, we can go into what all of the different traumas are, but, let's just put an umbrella over it and just talk about trauma, capital T trauma, as, those experiences in our lives and in our ancestors, in our families' lives that have shaped the way that we are as human beings, right? And so when we're talking about intergenerational trauma, we're talking about trauma that carries over, right? And there's two ways that happens. There's a lot of evidence and research that shows that trauma lives in our bodies, and it can actually change our DNA so that our offspring have a different DNA based on the traumatic experiences that we have, right? So we get trauma passed down to us in our DNA, right? Hardwired. It affects the way that we grow and develop and all of that. And then it also shows up, right? Like not just in our own individual bodies, but it also in the way that we respond to the world around us. And sometimes and oftentimes when we're talking about trauma, we're also talking about people living in this like fight or flight survival mode and mentality and mindset, which carries over to their actions, right? And so, you know, the way that shows up in our families and how that makes a difference in the ways that we grow up, and then how we in turn, when we become adults and have families of our own, how that shapes our own children and so on and so forth. And I think it's really fascinating. And I think more and more people are waking up to the fact that, like, you know, and it's hard to grapple with because there's a level of like passion and understanding that, compassion and understanding that has to come from the process of healing and going through generational trauma and realizing, you know, the way that I grew up or the way that my mother used to yell all the time or the way that, you know, my dad was cold or like unable to show warmth. Those are just examples. You know, we have a hard time grappling with why those things are the way they are. And oftentimes, you know, in order to kind of move on, right? We're talking about breaking chains, the person who's going to say, you know what, enough, like enough of being this way. We're going to do something different. I'm going to do something different as a parent, as a sister, you know, as a daughter, to shift the way that we operate as a family unit. A lot of that takes a huge amount of like compassion and forgiveness and like understanding that oftentimes people are the way they are because of things that are outside of their control.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think that it takes a lot of courage, you know, to be a person in your family that is going to do what comes naturally to everybody because of this, you know, all of the things that you just described around how things get passed down generationally.
Yeah.
And that becomes like, we often talk about the culture of a family, right? So when you suddenly become someone who is doing something different or going against the grain of, you know, the family's culture, it takes a lot of courage because people are not great with change. We know that. We see that every day in day-to-day life in our workplaces, you know, but especially in families, I think when you start to do something differently, that can create a lot of waves. And, you know, it takes, I think, a lot of courage to be the person who says, like, I'm going to do this differently. I'm going to make a different choice for myself and for the people who I'm influence. And, you know, I think there's a lot of like prayers and hope in that like other people will follow you on that journey. But you never really know because people have to be fully ready for change. You know, or it doesn't happen. You know, I always use this with families that I've worked with over the years where like children's services will say like, we want these kids to like be in therapy, blah, 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 whatever the case may be. And it's like, or the parents, you know, they want the parents to be in therapy. And it's, you know, I understand like where people are coming from, but it has to be more than you're just writing that they have to go to therapy on a piece of paper. Because then somebody is just showing up because like you said they have to, you know, it's like you have to be ready to engage in that process because therapy is not really about the therapist, you know, it's about like you coming into that room or into that Zoom room, you know, each week or month or however often and talking through what's happening. And so change is hard. And when you start changing the way that you function within your family or like the role that you've always held in your family and you're like, I'm just going to not do that anymore. For me, you know, it's amazing sometimes how people can get very upset, hurt.
Yeah.
And sometimes hurt comes out as in anger in lots of different ways with this. So
it's so true. It's so true. Yeah. Like, you know, it's really tough, and it's not a journey for the faint of heart, you know. And I think that every so often in a family, there's that person who, like, from the day they were born, everyone's like, this one is not quite like the rest of them, you know. And like over time, like it starts to like unfold, you know, the ways that, you know, we start to awaken to, you know, there's a better way to do this, or there's a different way that causes less damage and less harm. And I think a lot of that is through exposure to other ways of being, you know, other environments, right? It's really easy to, like, if you're just kind of isolated in your family dynamic and environment, you know, to kind of just keep going along with it, you know, even if it doesn't feel right. But the second you start to get a whiff of something else or a different way of being, or, you know, you have a friend who, you know, grew up way differently than you, and you see the difference in how they're experiencing life versus you, or, you know, all kinds of things. I think a lot of generational curse breakers are like first-time college students, right? The first in their family to like go away, go to school, you know, do something different than what typically is happening in their neighborhood, right? Like you see them starting to realize like, oh, like, you know, the way things have always been doesn't have to be, you know, and we start to explore. And so, like you said, you know, it can be really challenging for the other people in life who are not, you know, there's the stages of change, which I love. I always think about the stages of change when I feel stuck in a process with somebody or like a system or whatever, you know. And so the stages of change have different stages. There's pre-contemplation, which is like, and I might have mentioned this in a previous podcast before, but like pre-contemplation, which is like the stage of change where you don't even think anything needs to change, right? Like you're just going about your life, you're fine. And then contemplation, which is like, oh, like, you know, this could be different. Maybe I'm just going to do some research. I'm going to Google some things, or I'm going to ask around. And then there's like preparation, where you're actually starting to take the steps to create the change that you're looking to see. And so, you know, thinking about, and there's more stages after that, but like thinking about that from a generational curse breaker's perspective, you're often in like the preparing and like main action stage where you're actually doing the thing. And then the people that surround you might be in pre-contemplation mode. So they don't even think anything is wrong. And so, you know, when you start to do things differently, and I know we're talking very broadly and in generalities, right? So you can, listeners, you can insert your own kind of life experience and examples into this. But like once they start doing things differently, people who are in pre-contemplation stage are going to naturally start to feel defensive, right? They're going to start to feel like you're telling me I'm doing something wrong, or, you know, it could feel like criticism, or, you know, any other number of things, shame, guilt, right? That all human emotions that are really hard to grapple with. And so, you know, I've known a lot of generational curse breakers who've had to cut ties from their family of origin in order to like survive in the journey that they're on, you know, which is really sad, but like oftentimes a reality if the curses that you're trying to break are terrible enough that like you can't coexist anymore in that space.
Yeah. And I think especially because we are often so like rooted in family, that having those conversations around, you know, ending a relationship or pausing a relationship for a while is a little atypical to the way that we approach things, because, you know, we really believe in family. But I think, you know, family is not only just the nuclear, right? It's also your extended family, it's your friends, right? Like the family that you choose. These are like really important things that I think we often talk about. Sometimes we frame it under natural supports or, you know, I often say like, who are the people who aren't paid to be here, right? Those are the people that are really important and that you find along the way. that help you in those times of turmoil. You know, I always think about as I was coming into my own and am a bit of a, you know, curse breaker. And,
Rolling Stone.
Yeah, Rolling Stone in my family. You know, I didn't, coming from a Cape Verdean family that was very traditional, and, you know, like I was not married when I had my first child, and it was a huge thing. Like, people were not talking to me. I was like, okay, well, I'm doing this thing now. And, you know, it's hard to kind of like stand on your own and make these decisions.
Yeah.
But, you know, for me, that's not like where I was in my journey. And so, you know, I met so many people along the way that became my family, and that we raised our kids together and differently, you know, and everything, you know, I'm a true believer that like everything happens for a reason. Everything like works out the way that it's supposed to. And, you know, for me, like I'm back talking to everyone and everything is fine. But there was a time there where it was rough and rocky. And, you know, like when we talk about curse breaking, right? Like, I feel like I paved the way for several other women after me and my family who decided that they were going to have their kids prior to being married, you know, and some of them have ended up getting married. Some of them have not. And so, but that like challenge that they went through with like not having anybody talk to them, like they didn't face that because I had already kind of like born you for them.
You took that on. You ran so they could walk.
Exactly. I feel like I'm gonna send out a group text later and be like, all of you people owe me at least one drink for this.
You're welcome. You're welcome, because I paved the way so you could actually have the support, because people realize that not supporting people when they're having a baby is not cool. You're welcome.
Exactly. You're welcome.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. I mean, and it doesn't even have to be something huge, right? Like I think we all in our way, like, because just naturally as humans have this propensity to like differentiate ourselves, you know, create our own individuality in the midst of everything, you know. And a few episodes back, we talked about like individual versus collectivist cultures, right? And I think a lot of generational curse breakers who are coming from collectivist cultures have a really challenging time about it, because the stance of the culture within that family system is everything we do is for the greater good of everyone, not just for one individual. And that's kind of flies directly in the face of someone who's a curse breaker, because you're saying in that moment, you know, I'm doing what's best for me, regardless of what you all think and what you all think should be happening in order to keep the family system going the way that it's going. And, you know, I think, like, I know there's a ton, like the Haitian community, especially like people who were born here to parents who were born in Haiti and immigrated here, or like first generation Americans, right? Like, I feel like that is a whole generation of curse breakers. Like, it's from like the haircuts they choose to have to the clothes they choose to wear to like what they choose to do, right? Like, there's this like ongoing joke that in the Haitian community, if you're like not a nurse, a doctor, a lawyer, like what are you even doing with your life, right? And these people are like, I'm gonna be an artist, like I'm gonna go do something completely different, you know. And like that in and of itself, right? Because the entire time you're going and you're doing these things, you're hearing constantly like how what you're doing is not good or not satisfactory, or you're not living up to a standard that other people have put out there for you. And I think, you know, in and of that, it's that within that kind of scope of breaking curses from a collectivist culture requires like a huge amount of like grit, resilience, mental fortitude, you know. And I think that's something like the mental health of the curse breakers, right? Like we don't always talk about it because those are the people that appear and exude this like strength, like this like can do, I'm gonna do it no matter what attitude. And a lot of times we don't consider like what it means to do that work from an emotional standpoint, from a mental health standpoint, you know. And so I just want to say shout out to all the curse breakers out there. We see you.
Yeah.
We know this shit is not easy.
We feel you.
We feel you. And keep going, because, you know, at the end of the day, like what your goal is, your vision, when you aspire, what you aspire to is going to be so sweet, you know, when you get there, when you realize like, okay, like I've created my own individuality within this like larger culture that I'm from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, we are in a very interesting time when it comes to like Black culture. You know, I love that like so many street names are being renamed, you know, because like they were named after slave owners, and like, you know, people are talking about what the real history is, you know, in this country. And, you know, people are reading important books like How to Be an Anti-Racist and, you know, these other types of books. But I think it's also a time within the Black community where there are a lot of people who are taking new approaches to like the way that they parent and they address their mental health. And, you know, I think this is something that we see a lot in the mental health field, is that families, you know, who may say like they spank their kids, or they, you know, this is the way that they discipline their kids is through like some sort of like physical punishment, like spanking, are oftentimes end up being like in the system, right? And I remember I read this book. I'm not remembering the title right now, but essentially what it talked about was that all of these things like stem from what happened with Black people in the times of slavery.
Yeah.
Right. And that when white people are like, hey, you know, like that was then, this is now. It's not like I'm a slave owner, right? Like it's not about that. It's about like, if you look at the like landscape of time and like dropped a pebble into like a lake, like we're like one ripple out from like slavery. Like there are people still alive. I mean, like our parents and grandparents were very much a part of like the ending of slavery, but like segregation and like all of those things that was happening like in in the boomers generation.
It's true.
You know, I mean, that is not that far away.
No, they're still alive. They still remember it. There are people who's alive today and marched with Dr. King. Like, and so these are like, I mean, his kids are alive, like and well, and like, you know, like this is, so we're not that far away from it. And you know, this, like, when we talk about how things are passed down, like, unfortunately, so many children were born into slavery. And, like, that was all that people knew were, like, these ways of physical punishment or whatnot. And so it's like, we talk about the unlearning. I think there's so much unlearning that is happening right now. Reprogramming.
Yes. It's not just for white people who need to do a lot of unlearning and relearning around like what the realities are and were. You know, it's like a little smoke and mirrors thing that you have to kind of like actually realize what's happening. Because this is what Black folks have been walking through for so long. And I think in Black communities, it's difficult to do that unlearning, you know, and it brings up a lot of emotions for people, you know, because it feels critical when you are trying to raise your child with the only skills that you know, the only things that you've ever seen within your family. I think here in Massachusetts and in Boston, it's less prevalent than in other places, like in some of the southern states, or like, but like it's really a part of the community. And so when you become like the first person in your Black family that's like, I'm not going to spank my kids. And, like, my kids are in therapy. And, like, you don't yell.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen, like, people in that person's family be like, well, your kid is going to be bad. And, like, you know, like,
listen to you.
What's the therapist going to do? Like, your kid's not going to respect you. And so there is, I think, a lot of that when it comes to, like, these intersections of, like, when we talk about generational curses and generational trauma, like, this is where, like, it's happening. It's like, that's kind of, I almost see those words as, like, interchangeable.
It's so true. It's so true. I mean, even with me, like, my parents, that we definitely have difference in, like, the way that we raise kids, obviously, you know, and, like, we have the conversations often, you know, like, something will happen, like, one of the boys will do something, and, like, my response, like, to my dad or, like, to my mom will not, like, be enough. And I'm like, no, like, it's okay. Like, we'll talk about it later. Yeah. Like, I don't need to, like, yell at him in front of everyone, you know, not like they're pushing that, but, like, even in those small ways, like, you know, I think it's natural for us to reflect on our experience and decide how things that we want to keep and stay the same and things that we want to do away with, you know. It's funny, though, as you were talking, I was thinking about this video that I saw. I forget which social media platform it was on, but there was this white woman who was talking about how Black people are always naming their kids, like, crazy names, right? From her perspective, she's like, why, like, all these, like, weird, crazy names?
This irritates me.
And you know, this was the first.
It irritates me. Let me clarify what I'm saying. It irritates me that people have a judgment about what other people name their kids.
Right.
Especially
and
with what you're about to say.
Right. Like, we're tying it to, like, a race, right? And it's like, oh, nobody has any issue with, like, the names of people from, like, Kazakhstan or Russia. We just figure out how to say it. You know, but, like, okay. Like, we
all know how to say Vladimir.
But, like, Delante is a problem. Like, are we okay? But, like, so that part aside, though, the woman gave a really eloquent answer that, like, I hadn't even, as a person of color, hadn't even, like, made the connection to. And she was like, well, you know, to your point about the pebble and the ripple, she's like, in slavery times, like, you would have a child and then that child would get sold as soon as they were able to work, and you had no idea where they were or what they were doing, and the only way to try to even have a piece of understanding of, like, where your child might be was to name them something super unique, so that if you ever heard that name somewhere, you knew it was your child. Like, it was, like, purposefully done so that people could keep track of their family members. Like, that's crazy, you know? And so for people to be, like, looking at an application and be like, no, you know, like that, like, you are truly just not understanding history. And, like actually that person, it probably is going to bring so much, like, culture, diversity, and, like, perspective to your organization. But because you have a bias about what people's names might mean because of the way that it's spelled or the way that it's pronounced, like, you're gonna have a judgment, you know?
And so when we think about generational trauma,
right,
like, imagine if, like, anyone imagine that being your life today, like, that you don't know what was going to happen to your child when you gave birth to them. And so that was the only way that you had to be able to track them. Like, just even thinking about that, like, I'm getting goosebumps. You know, it's like,
I know.
And then you hope someday that you hear your kid's name in the street. And that's how you identify them. That, thank God they're alive, you know, or whatever the case may be. I mean, that's just,
I know.
So, I mean, there's always, like, rationale and information for all of these decisions. And these are things that people carry, you know, like, these are the stories that people tell forward, you know, and it impacts how we move through the world, you know, when we think about the choices that we make and the people who we surround ourselves with, and, you know, what we believe and what we don't believe. And I think especially in the Black community, like, who we can trust, right? Like, you know, like, all of my healthcare providers for me and my kids are all Black, right? Like intentionally, you know, like I just am not in a place where I believe that fully 100% that like, and especially for my kids.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you always put more effort forth for your kids, I feel like.
Than you do yourself.
You know, like I just don't believe that I've seen too many times that white doctors and other medical folks don't listen to the pain of Black people. Yeah. You know, we still hear about it all the time. It's not like this is something that used to happen. Like
it happens all the time. It happened to me when I had my second child. It was like, oh, and my first. Actually, now I think about it.
Wait, when I go back in my trauma.
Yeah, when I go back to my trauma and uncover it.
Let me flip through my
easy speak. I can say that both times, we talked about this before, Black maternal health is really a challenge in this country, you know? And I didn't know too much about it when I was pregnant with my kids in my 20s, you know, but like my first child, like I wasn't feeling great. I was at the hospital, you know, for days in labor, and like they wanted to send me home. They're like, oh, your labor's not progressing enough, right? And it's just like, you know, one scan later, if we went home, we would have been another statistic, you know? And then like same with my other son, like he probably should have been a C-section, but we waited, you know? And like thankfully everything's okay, but like white providers, you know? And so I am very grateful now for my current OB who is Black and knows what the fuck's up. Because like I don't know that if someone said to me tomorrow, like, you can have another child but your provider has to be white, I'd probably say no. Just like survival, like I'm not doing it.
Yeah, because you're like, oh, so now I'm gonna have to teach myself how to give childbirth to myself by myself, just in case. Yeah, I mean,
crazy.
Yeah, it's scary. You know, like the same thing happened to me with my son, my second child. My water broke like walking out of the hospital after being a high risk pregnancy, and I walked back in. And I was like, my water just broke, and they were like, okay, bye. I was like, bye, and I like had my little kid with me, my little stepdaughter with me. And like it was like rush hour traffic. Yeah. I remember like being in like the carpool lane, like in rush hour traffic. Oh my God. Knowing my water had broken.
No way.
And I was like calling my family to be like, help me to like meet me at home, because like, Jesus, you know, like putting things together. But like they should have kept me there.
And kept you there. That's crazy.
You know, and
I can't imagine you on 93 with your water just broken with a freaking child in the backseat. Like, can we be for real?
Jeez. What a wild thing.
Jeez.
Yep.
That's wild.
And it was like all night I was home, you know, and nothing was happening. I kept calling them every hour. I'm like, you know, I'm really not progressing. I feel like I should. They're like, it's fine. I'm like, no, I literally have no anything. Like my water broken now, nothing. I don't think like this. No contractions, nothing.
Oh my God.
For like 12 hours.
You could have sued those motherfuckers.
Ugh.
I bet.
Listen, girl.
Sorry.
It's just like, but these are the things.
Yeah.
So I feel like,
Side note.
It's just like, it's really wild. I think just this information keeps coming forward, you know, and people are learning it more and are able to make different decisions about like their healthcare providers. But these are the things around like generational curses. I think, you know, I think for a long time, like my grandparents, they didn't think about this. Like they actually felt like they should go to white people for everything.
Yeah. They're the experts.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it's like, that's not right. That, you know, that's not correct. Yeah. And so it's like an entirely different conversation. And, you know, me being lucky enough to still have my grandmother, you know, alive and be able to have some of these conversations, like, her perspective on things is entirely different than mine, you know, and like at 91, you're not changing anybody's thought process on anything. So it's like, it's not going to get in. Yeah. I'm not getting into a debate with my grandmother, but it's just very interesting to hear like what her thought process was and like things that she considered or didn't, and how it really differs from, my own life and the way that I make decisions for me and my kids.
Yeah. It's so fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I gotta say, I feel like maybe it's just because of the fact that I'm a woman. I feel like a lot of generational curse breakers are women, they're moms, not to say men aren't breaking curses too. Like, it happens all the time. The man who grew up without a dad, lived in a single mom household, who then turns around and is like dedicated to being a great dad and like being there for his kids. And, we see that a lot. That single parent household is something that in the Black community is like really prominent, and preeminent, and it makes a huge difference. And I really commend the people who are like working hard to like shift that, even if it doesn't work out between the two of you, co-parenting effectively, whatever the case may be, So I feel like generational curse breakers come in all shapes and sizes, and I just want to like recognize everyone, because it's just, it's tough, it's hard. And there, while you're breaking those curses within your own family system, there's societal systems that are working against you, right? So it's double time on the double time. It's like emotional damage on emotional damage, and you're just like working through it. So I think it's really one of those things that people don't get recognized enough for doing that hard work. It goes unnoticed, a lot of the time. It can also often at times I feel like a solo struggle.
Yeah.
Because nobody truly understands you and your family and what you're battling against. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And I think when you talk about the other kind of like societal impacts, it's like a lot of times people who are working to make these changes get, like a bad rap.
Yeah.
Like they become singled out. Like, this is how we have gotten to like the angry Black woman, like, in the office. It's like because like she chooses to not do something that is not part of her job and is going to stand her ground the same way her colleague that is white is doing, right? But like, because it's coming from a Black woman, it's perceived differently, and so I think these are the things that like are consistent and ongoing, and like unless you're really connected to people that are doing this and working to make a change for themselves and for the future, then you wouldn't recognize it,
right?
Or you might even play into these stereotypes and beliefs about people. If you're not cognizant and careful. And I think it's on everybody at this point in time. I feel like everyone has the responsibility to open their eyes and do their research and read a book that you wouldn't normally read, or
stay curious.
Listen to a different side, that you typically wouldn't listen to. Like, if you don't know or are not cool with any like people of color, like find someone or like read Black authors.
Go make a Black friend.
Like it's not that hard.
Well, listen, you too can be invited to the cookout if you play your cards right.
Maybe. It's a long jump from being cool with someone to being invited to the cookout.
You play your cards right. You might just get an invite. Oh my gosh. Well, I feel like we've covered a lot. There's a lot of resources related to this exact thing. We'll link Anna's podcast. I think her podcast is a great resource for those curse breakers. She told us on our podcast that she's getting ready to really just focus in on that. So I'm excited to see the journey and to hear all the stories. You mentioned that book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. I have not read that book. But
I purchased this book for several people.
You have?
I sure have.
You've gifted it?
I like Amazon is delivered here. I love that.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Yes. That book. And, you know, it's Minority Mental Health Month. We're coming off the heels of Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, Pride Month. And, you know, I think what we didn't talk about today, which I think is a big hot topic that I think we should link some resources to, is Black men's mental health. And I think we talked a little bit about that last year. But, you know, men's mental health is challenging because of the societal kind of sketching of what it means to be a man, and vulnerability is not, you know, it's not celebrated, right? So there's that aspect of it, but then being a Black man on top of it is an extra layer of challenge. And so there are some great resources out there. Black Men Heal is one. But yeah, just make sure that you hit the description so you can access all those different resources that we have.
Yeah, definitely. Because, you know, there's always someone or something that you can read or reach out to. You can always reach out to us, and we're happy to send resources along or send people in the right direction, because it's important that I think people stay connected and together, and, you know, got to bring some solidarity. Yeah. Solidarity. Did I say that correct? The tequila's hitting.
I think so. Solidarity. Sounds right.
I don't know. Sometimes, you know, you say a word.
I know.
Like, that,
I know.
Right?
I know.
Why does that word sound weird?
Yeah. My son said to me the other day, he's like, Mom, do you know if you say a word 4 times, it starts to sound weird? I was like, you're right. You say it's true. Like any word, lemon, 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 lemon. You're like, wait, lemon? Lemon? Lemon. Lemon? It's true.
That I automatically go to. Have I been spelling that wrong my whole life?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So yeah. Thank you all for joining us today at the Speakeasy.
Yes.
It's been a wonderful conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. And tell a friend.
Yeah. And stick around for our meditation minute.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye.